Have you ever felt like your own strength was beginning to fade? That the vitality you once took for granted was slowly slipping away? In a world that tells us the only answer lies in expensive powders and complicated science, we bring you an unforgettable story that proves otherwise. Today, we invite you to the small town of Port Blossom to meet Nick Vance, a retired carpenter who discovers that the secret to rebuilding his body and reclaiming his life wasn't in a modern laboratory, but in the simple, powerful wisdom of generations past. This is The Strength of the Tides. If you find this story inspiring, please help us by hitting that like button. It truly supports our channel. And make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Now, let's begin. The bag of soil wasn't particularly heavy. 40 pounds perhaps. Nick Vance had spent a lifetime lifting things far heavier. For 40 years as a carpenter, he had hauled 100-pound beams of Douglas fir, hoisted sheets of plywood onto rooftops, and swung a 20-pound sledgehammer with an easy, rhythmic grace. His hands, though now softened by the first few months of retirement, were still a roadmap of calluses and scars, a testament to a life of physical work, of strength he had always taken for granted. This bag, however, felt different. He stood on the gravel driveway, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. Eleanor, his wife, was humming to herself by the newly tilled garden bed, her silver hair catching the golden light. "Just over here, Artie," she called, pointing with her trowel to a spot near the rose bushes. "The petunias need a good home." Nick nodded, a familiar confidence in his posture. He bent his knees, just as he always had, and wrapped his fingers around the thick plastic. He braced himself and pulled. For a fraction of a second, everything was normal. The weight shifted, his muscles engaged. But then, something gave way. Not a snap, not a tear, but a strange, liquid weakness that flooded his arms and back. His grip faltered. The bag tilted precariously, its weight pulling him off balance. He stumbled forward a step, his breath catching in his throat. His legs, which had carried him up countless ladders, trembled with a terrifying lack of conviction. The world seemed to shrink to the shifting weight in his hands and the frantic beat of his own heart. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over him. He could feel Eleanor's gentle humming stop, could feel her eyes on him. With a final, desperate grunt, he heaved the bag the last few feet, letting it drop to the grass with a heavy thud. He stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, not daring to look at her. He stared at the bag of soil as if it were an adversary that had just bested him in a fight he didn't know he was in. "Arthur, are you all right?" Eleanor's voice was soft, laced with a concern that felt worse than any accusation. "Fine," he managed to rasp, waving a dismissive hand. "Just slipped on the gravel." It was a clumsy lie, and they both knew it. The gravel was packed hard. The truth was far more frightening. In that moment, lifting a simple bag of soil, Nick Vance had felt the shadow of frailty touch him for the first time. It was the cold, creeping fear that retirement wasn't a well-earned rest, but the beginning of a slow, inevitable fade into dependency. It was the terror of becoming a man who could no longer do the simple things, a man who needed help. Later that week, the fear solidified into a quiet tension that settled over their small, tidy home. It was in the silence at the dinner table, in the way Nick now watched his own hands, as if they belonged to a stranger. The final insult arrived on Saturday morning in the form of his son, Mark. Mark drove up from the city in his sleek, sensible sedan, bringing with him the crisp, sterile scent of ambition and modernity. He was a good son, successful and caring, but he viewed the world through the lens of efficiency and optimization. He stepped into the house carrying a large cardboard box with a glossy, futuristic logo. "Hey, Dad, Mom," he said, kissing Eleanor on the cheek. He placed the box on the kitchen counter with a proud thud. "Brought you something." Inside was a collection of large, white plastic canisters. The labels were a confusing jumble of scientific-sounding words. Advanced whey isolate, micellar casing complex, anabolic recovery formula. "It's a protein regimen," Mark announced, his voice filled with the earnest conviction of a true believer. "State of the art. I did the research. For preventing sarcopenia, that's age-related muscle loss. It's the only real solution, Dad. You just mix a scoop with water twice a day. Nick stared at the canisters. They looked like something from a laboratory, alien and impersonal. He felt a familiar, stubborn pride rise in his chest, a defense against the pity he saw in his son's eyes. He wasn't a patient to be managed. He was a man who had built houses with his bare hands. "I don't need that stuff," Nick said, his voice flatter than he intended. Mark's smile tightened. "Dad, it's science. Your body's needs change after 60. You can't just rely on regular food anymore. This is specifically formulated to help you maintain muscle mass." "There's nothing wrong with my muscle mass," Nick retorted, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. The memory of the soil bag, of his trembling legs, mocked him. The conversation spiraled from there, a tense dance of Mark's well-meaning but condescending logic and Arthur's wounded, defensive pride. It ended with the box of supplements sitting untouched on the counter, a monument to the new and unwelcome chasm that had opened between them. When Mark finally left, a strained goodbye hanging in the air, Nick felt a profound sense of isolation. He was alone, adrift in a body he no longer understood, with a fear he couldn't bring himself to name. He walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the garden, where the new petunias were already beginning to bloom from the soil he had struggled so mightily to move. They were vibrant and full of life, a stark and painful contrast to the cold helplessness that had taken root deep within him. The silence in the house had become a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was thicker than the morning fog that rolled in from the harbor, and it carried the unspoken weight of Arthur's failure and Mark's disappointment. To escape it, Nick pulled on an old flannel jacket, mumbled to Eleanor that he was going for a walk, and stepped out into the crisp Maine air. He didn't have a destination in mind, but his feet, guided by decades of habit, led him down the sloping streets toward the familiar chaos of the Port Blossom docks. The harbor was the town's beating heart, a symphony of sounds and smells that had been the backdrop to his entire life. The cry of gulls, the rhythmic chug of a diesel engine, the sharp, briny scent of low tide mixed with the faint smell of salt and old wood. Normally, these things brought him a sense of peace, of belonging. Today, they only served to highlight his own idleness. He felt like a ship moored in the harbor, watching the other boats head out to sea. He leaned against a weathered piling, hands stuffed in his pockets, and watched the fishing crews at work. His eyes were drawn to a familiar figure on the deck of the Sea Serpent. It was Silas Croft, his next-door neighbor. Silas was, by Arthur's estimation, at least 75 years old, but his movements told a different story. He was a wiry man, his face a creased and sun-beaten map of a life spent on the water. With an economy of motion that spoke of pure, practiced strength, Silas was single-handedly hauling lobster traps onto the deck, each one a heavy, dripping cage of wood and wire. He moved with a steady, unhurried rhythm, his back straight, his shoulders working smoothly. Nick watched, a knot of envy tightening in his stomach. There was no hesitation in Silas's movements, no tremor of weakness. He worked with the quiet confidence of a man who trusted his body completely. As Silas paused to call out a joke to a neighboring boat, his laughter carrying easily across the water, the envy in Arthur's gut was joined by a flicker of something else, a deep, aching sense of wonder. How, after all those years of hard labor, did Silas still possess that kind of vitality? Feeling more lost than ever, Nick turned away from the docks and walked toward the town's center. He ended up at Finley's Market, the small grocery store that had been the town's staple for generations. He wandered the aisles without purpose, his mind still on Silas, until a sharp, familiar voice cut through his thoughts. Pure foolishness. They sell you a $5 word in a $50 jar and call it health. Nick looked up to see Dr. Genevieve Reed, standing near the small health food section. She was a formidable woman, a retired physician, with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for speaking her mind without any sugarcoating. She was staring at a young couple who were earnestly studying a canister of protein powder, much like the ones Mark had brought. The couple, flustered by her loud pronouncement, quickly moved on. Dr. Reed shook her head, her gaze sweeping the aisle until it landed on Arthur. "Nick Vance," she said, her tone softening slightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Nick managed a weak smile, just thinking, "Genevieve, that's a dangerous pastime for a retired man," she quipped, her sharp eyes appraising him. "You've got that look. The one men get when they realize their warranty is starting to run out. Did one of your children try to sell you on this powdered nonsense?" Nick was taken aback by her directness. He found himself nodding. "My son, Mark. He worries." "Of course, he does," she said, stepping closer. She lowered her voice, but it lost none of its intensity. "They all worry, and they all think the answer comes in a plastic scoop. They've forgotten what real strength is made of. They've been sold a bill of goods by an industry that profits from fear." He saw an opening, a chance to ask the question that had been haunting him. "I was just down at the docks," he said, watching Silas Croft. "He must be 10 years my senior, and he moves like he's 40. Doctor." Reed's expression changed, a flicker of genuine respect in her eyes. "Silas," she said, nodding slowly. "Now there is a man who understands. He doesn't waste his money on this rubbish. He knows the old ways." She paused, looking Nick directly in the eye, as if issuing a challenge. "If you want to be strong, Arthur," she said, her voice a low, firm command, "stop thinking like your son. Eat like your grandfather did. Eat from the sea and the soil." And with that, she gave him a curt nod, turned, and continued her shopping, leaving Nick standing alone in the aisle. He was baffled. "Eat like your grandfather did." The words were simple, almost nonsensical, yet they resonated with a strange authority. It wasn't a prescription or a scientific formula. It was a riddle, a piece of old-world wisdom offered up in the fluorescent lighting of a modern grocery store. Confused but undeniably intrigued, Nick left the market without buying a thing, his mind churning with the doctor's cryptic advice. Dr. Reed's words, "Eat from the sea and the soil," echoed in Arthur's mind for the rest of the day. They were a simple, almost poetic, directive, yet they offered no clear path. It felt like being given a compass that pointed not north, but back in time. He spent the afternoon wrestling with a deep-seated skepticism. The world had moved on. Science, progress, Mark's expensive canisters. These were the tools of the modern age. How could the answer to a modern problem be found in the past? The next morning, his pride still smarting, he found himself once again by the harbor. He told himself he was just there for the fresh air, but he knew he was looking for Silas. He saw him on the pier, mending a fishing net with nimble, practiced fingers. The simple act was mesmerizing. There was a quiet dignity in the work, a sureness in his hands that Nick painfully missed in his own. Taking a deep breath, Nick walked down the pier, his footsteps loud on the wooden planks. This was it. He was about to do something he hadn't done in years. Ask for help. "Silas," he began, his voice coming out a bit hoarse. The old fisherman looked up, his bright blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Arthur, good to see you. Don't tell me you're finally thinking of trading in that hammer for a fishing rod." "Not just yet," Nick said, trying for a light tone. He gestured vaguely toward the sea serpent. "I saw you working the other day. Hauling those traps. You make it look easy." Silas chuckled. A low, rumbling sound like stones shifting on the seabed. "After 60 years, it'd be a shame if I still made it look hard." Nick hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He felt his cheeks grow warm. "Look, Silas, I'll be blunt. I haven't been feeling myself lately. Feeling my age, I suppose. And I see you, and I just have to ask, what's your secret?" To his surprise, Silas threw his head back and let out a hearty, sea-weathered laugh that echoed across the water. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but one of genuine amusement. "Secret," he boomed. "Lord, Arthur, if I had a secret that good, I'd have bottled it up and sold it years ago. I'd be richer than the summer tourists." He set down his net. "Come on, walk with me back to the house. I'll show you the magic potion." Nick followed, a mix of relief and confusion washing over him. Silas's home was small and modest, smelling faintly of salt and beeswax. He led Nick not to a home gym or a medicine cabinet, but to the kitchen pantry. It was a simple affair, with neatly organized shelves. There was no high-tech equipment, no gleaming canisters of powder. Instead, Arthur's eyes fell upon stacks of simple, unassuming canned goods. Silas reached up and pulled down 2 cans, placing them on the counter with a quiet click. One was a flat, rectangular tin of sardines, the other a familiar round can of tuna. "This is it," Silas said, tapping a finger on the sardine tin. "The secret." Nick stared at the cans. This was the fuel for Silas's remarkable strength. He had always thought of canned fish as desperation food, something you ate when the power was out or when you couldn't afford a real piece of fish. As if reading his mind, Silas explained, "My father ate this, his father before him. It's pure, honest food, Arthur. No fancy labels, no promises it can't keep. This little can," he said, holding up the sardines, "is packed with more good protein than one of those $20 steaks at the fancy restaurant. And these omega-3s, they keep the old joints from creaking like a rusty hinge." He grinned. "Best of all, it's cheap. I can stock up a dozen at a time. Always have a powerful meal ready to go." Nick was speechless. It was so simple, so completely contrary to everything Mark had preached. He left Silas's house a few minutes later, clutching 2 cans that Silas had pressed into his hands, feeling more bewildered than ever. When he walked into his own kitchen, Eleanor looked up from her book. She saw the cans in his hands, then the look of profound uncertainty on his face. She didn't ask what had happened to the expensive supplements still sitting on the counter. She didn't question him. Instead, she simply stood up, a warm, supportive smile gracing her lips. "I was wondering what we'd have for lunch," she said gently, taking the can of tuna from his hand. That afternoon, she didn't just scoop the tuna out of the can. She treated it with care, mixing it with a bit of mayonnaise, finely chopped celery, and a squeeze of fresh lemon. She snipped chives and dill from her herb garden, their bright green scent filling the kitchen. She served the salad on thick slices of toasted sourdough bread. They ate in a comfortable silence. The meal was delicious, fresh, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. It was more than just food. It was a small act of rebellion against his own fear, a first, tentative step onto a different path. As Nick took the last bite of his sandwich, he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the food. It was the faint, unfamiliar flicker of hope. The small victory with the tuna sandwich had lit a pilot light in Arthur's soul. It was a tiny flame, but it was enough to burn through the fog of his despair. Emboldened, he began to deliberately seek out Dr. Reed during her morning walks along the cliffside path overlooking the harbor. He'd time his own walks to coincide with hers, falling into step beside her. He told her about his conversation with Silas and the simple meal Eleanor had prepared. Dr. Reed listened intently, a rare, approving smile on her face. "A good start, Arthur," she said, her pace not slowing. "But the sea is only half the answer. The soil is the other, and that includes what comes from the animals that live on it." She saw the question in his eyes and elaborated, translating complex science into simple, powerful truths. "Your muscles are like a furnace," she explained. "After you work them, even just walking or gardening, they need fuel immediately. That's where a protein called whey comes in. It's fast-acting, but you also need a slow-burning log to keep the fire going all night, to repair and rebuild while you sleep. That's a protein called casein." She stopped and pointed a firm finger at him. "You'll find the perfect combination in 2 places. Plain Greek yogurt for the morning to get the furnace going, and a small bowl of full-fat cottage cheese before bed to keep it burning. No sugar, no fancy flavors, just the honest-to-goodness stuff." Nick and Eleanor made a trip to Finley's Market that afternoon. The tubs of Greek yogurt and cottage cheese looked plain and unexciting next to the brightly colored, sugary options. But Nick was on a mission. The new items found a home in their refrigerator, displacing the carton of ice cream that had been his go-to comfort food. The change was immediate. The morning bowl of Greek yogurt, topped with a handful of Eleanor's fresh berries, was tangy and invigorating. It left him feeling energized, not heavy. The nightly ritual of a few spoonfuls of cottage cheese was surprisingly satisfying. Within a week, the results were no longer just a flicker of hope, they were tangible. The morning stiffness in his back and knees began to fade. The nagging, low-grade fatigue that had been his constant companion started to lift, replaced by a steady, more consistent level of energy that lasted the entire day. Eleanor, seeing the genuine change in her husband, became his most dedicated partner. She threw herself into the project with a quiet determination, spending her afternoons not just tending her garden, but researching the most nutrient-dense and affordable foods the earth had to offer. It was she who discovered the next piece of the puzzle. One evening, the scent wafting from the kitchen was different. A rich, earthy aroma of spices and simmering vegetables. She served him a thick, hearty soup. "What's this?" Nick asked, peering into his bowl. "Lentil," she said simply. Nick was skeptical. He'd eaten lentil soup before, of course, but he'd never considered it a food for building strength. It seemed too humble. How could a tiny, unassuming legume compare to a piece of steak? He voiced his doubt to Dr. Reed the next morning. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Ah, the humble lentil," she exclaimed. "Arthur, do you know what triggers your body to actually build muscle? It's a specific amino acid called leucine, and lentils are packed with it. More than that, they're full of iron. That weakness, that fatigue so many people mistake for normal aging is often just a mild iron deficiency. Lentils correct that." She explained that strength wasn't just about protein, it was about the entire support system. The fiber in lentils fed the good bacteria in the gut, which in turn allowed the body to better absorb all the other nutrients he was eating. It was a lesson that resonated deeply with Arthur. True strength wasn't about one single impressive ingredient. It was about the synergy of many small, overlooked things working together. It was a truth that applied as much to his body as it did to his life. Several weeks passed. The new way of eating was no longer an experiment. It was a comfortable and enjoyable routine. Nick felt a lightness in his step he hadn't felt in years. He was sleeping more soundly and waking with a clear head. But the real test, the one that haunted the edges of his thoughts, was yet to come. It arrived on a bright Tuesday morning when Eleanor, with a hopeful glint in her eye, announced she had ordered another 40-pound bag of soil to finish the petunia bed. Arthur's heart gave a nervous thud. He watched from the kitchen window as the delivery truck pulled away, leaving the familiar plastic-wrapped bag sitting on the gravel driveway. It looked like a monument to his previous failure. He dried his hands on a kitchen towel, his movements slow and deliberate. Eleanor said nothing, but he could feel her watching, her love and hope a silent, tangible presence in the room. He walked outside. The sun was warm on his back. He approached the bag, not with bravado, but with a quiet, focused determination. He bent his knees, placing his feet firmly. He gripped the thick plastic, his calloused fingers finding a solid purchase. He remembered the feeling of that liquid weakness, and for a second, he faltered. Then he thought of Silas, of Dr. Reed's firm words, of Eleanor's unwavering support. He took a deep breath, engaged the muscles in his back and legs, and lifted. The bag came up cleanly. It was heavy, yes, but it was a solid, manageable weight. There was no tremor, no stumble, no sudden wave of weakness. He held it securely against his chest and walked, step by steady step, across the lawn to the garden. He lowered it gently to the grass beside the flower bed. It was a monumental victory. It wasn't just about lifting a bag of soil, it was about lifting the weight of his own fear. It was the reclaiming of a piece of his identity, a promise to himself that he was not done yet. From the window, Eleanor watched, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears of pure joy and relief blurring her vision. The journey had strengthened more than just Arthur's muscles. It had fortified the unshakable foundation of their life together. Mark's next visit was a test of a different kind. He arrived on a Saturday, the same well-meaning concern etched on his face. He found Nick in the kitchen, whistling as he cracked 3 eggs into a sizzling pan for an omelette. "Dad." Mark's voice was sharp with alarm. "3 eggs. The yolks. You can't be serious. What about your cholesterol?" He gestured toward the counter where his box of supplements still sat, now gathering a thin layer of dust. The shake is a much safer, scientifically proven way to get your protein. A few months ago, Nick would have reacted with anger and defensiveness. But this time, he felt a calm, quiet confidence. He turned from the stove, spatula in hand, and looked his son in the eye. "Mark, the science you're talking about is 30 years old," he said, his tone even and patient. "I've been doing some reading. Dr. Reed has been helping me. It turns out that dietary cholesterol doesn't have much of an effect on blood cholesterol for most people." He continued, expertly folding the omelette over a bed of spinach and cheese. "And the yolk. That's where the good stuff island. Half the protein is in there, along with nutrients like vitamin D and choline, which are crucial for muscle function. Studies have shown that eating whole eggs builds significantly more muscle than just eating the whites. It's about how the nutrients work together." Mark was stunned into silence. He had come prepared for an argument with a stubborn old man. Instead, he was being given a calm, well-reasoned lesson by a father who was taking intelligent, informed control of his own health. He looked from the dusty box of supplements to the vibrant, healthy omelette on his father's plate, and for the first time, he began to question his own certainties. The final cornerstone of Arthur's new nutritional foundation was introduced by Silas's wife, Maria. She was a warm, gentle woman with a kind smile and hands that were never still. She invited Nick and Eleanor over one afternoon to teach them the age-old process of preparing dried beans. She showed them how to sort through the beans, rinsing them in cool water, and then leaving them to soak overnight in a large pot. "This is the most important step," she said, her voice soft. "It requires thinking ahead. It requires patience. You cannot rush a good thing." The next day, she taught them how to slow cook the beans in bulk with onions, garlic, and herbs until they were tender and flavorful. The process itself was a profound lesson. It stood in stark contrast to the instant gratification of Mark's Just Add Water supplements. Rebuilding strength, like cooking beans, wasn't a quick fix. It was a slow, steady process that required foresight, patience, and care. The incredible affordability of the beans became a point of quiet pride for Arthur. A large bag, costing only a few dollars, could provide dozens of protein-rich servings. It felt like a secret wisdom, a smart and sustainable way of living that made the expensive, flashy world of modern supplements seem foolish and wasteful. As summer gave way to the crisp chill of autumn, a new kind of energy settled over Port Blossom. It was the tense, watchful energy that always preceded a big storm. Meteorologists on the television spoke in grave tones about an early season nor'easter, a powerful tempest churning its way up the coast, promising gale-force winds and torrential rain. The town buzzed with urgent preparations. Shopkeepers boarded up windows, and homeowners secured loose furniture. The most frantic activity, as always, was down at the harbor, where fishermen worked tirelessly to protect their vessels, their very livelihoods, from the coming fury. Arthur, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, spent the day helping Eleanor secure their garden and batten down the hatches on their own home. As the sky turned a bruised, ominous purple, he walked down to the docks to see if anyone needed a hand. He found the harbor in a state of controlled chaos. It was there he saw it happen. Silas Croft, hurrying across the wet, slick deck of the Sea Serpent, lost his footing. He went down hard, his cry of pain sharp against the rising howl of the wind. Nick rushed over with several other fishermen. Silas was sitting up, his face pale, cradling his right hand. His wrist was bent at an unnatural angle. Panic flickered in the old fisherman's eyes as he looked at his boat, which was only half secured. "My lines," he rasped, the pain evident in his voice. "I can't finish." Without a moment of hesitation, Nick saw his neighbor's distress. The work that remained was intensely physical, hauling heavy, waterlogged ropes, wrestling with stiff, frozen tarps, and securing equipment against winds that could tear it loose. A few months ago, the thought of it would have terrified him. Now, he felt only a resolute sense of duty. He looked at Silas, then at the younger fishermen gathered around. "I'll help," he said, his voice clear and steady above the wind. "Show me what needs to be done." What followed was a battle. For hours, Nick worked alongside men half his age, pitting his strength against the raw power of the approaching storm. The wind tore at his jacket, and the rain, cold as ice, lashed his face. But he felt a fire burning within him. He hauled on thick, heavy ropes until his palms were raw, his muscles screaming in protest. He wrestled with a massive, unwieldy tarp, its canvas snapping and cracking in the wind like a rifle shot. He helped move and secure equipment that, just a few months prior, he would have thought impossible to even budge. He felt the burn in his shoulders, the ache in his back, the strain in his legs, but it was different now. It wasn't the terrifying signal of weakness. It was the satisfying feeling of power, of a body being pushed to its limits and proving itself capable. He moved with a purpose and confidence he thought he had lost forever. He was no longer a retired man watching from the sidelines. He was part of the fight. Through the rain and the roaring wind, he caught the eyes of the other fishermen. He saw in their expressions a quiet, grudging respect. He wasn't the old carpenter who needed help. He was Arthur, a man of Port Blossom, protecting his own. In that moment, his strength felt as vast and as powerful as the relentless tides themselves. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving a calm, clean-washed world in its wake. The morning sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the puddles that dotted the harbor. Nick woke up aching in places he'd forgotten he had. But it was a good ache, an earned soreness. And as he moved about the kitchen, he was amazed at how quickly the stiffness was already fading. News travels fast in a small town. By noon, the story of his efforts at the harbor had spread. People who had once offered him a sympathetic smile now gave him a nod of deep respect. The most important message came that afternoon. The phone rang, and it was Mark, but his voice was different. There was no lecture, no hint of condescension. There was only a quiet, genuine awe. Eleanor, worried, had called him during the storm. "Dad," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. I heard what you did. I'm so proud of you." There was a pause. "Mom told me about what you've been doing." The new diet. Another pause. "Dad, I was wrong." The admission hung in the air, a powerful and healing concession. "I threw out those canisters this morning," Mark continued, "and I was wondering, could you ask Mom for her lentil soup recipe?" Nick smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest that soothed every aching muscle. He had not just rebuilt his body, he had rebuilt the bridge to his son. Months passed. The vibrant green of a Maine spring returned to Port Blossom, painting the town in brilliant strokes of new life. Nick was a changed man. He was active, energetic, and fully engaged in his community. He spent his days helping Silas repair fishing gear with his one good hand, tending his own thriving garden, and taking long, vigorous walks with Eleanor along the coast. The shadow of frailty was gone, banished by the light of his own reclaimed strength. The story closes where it began, in the aisles of Finley's market. Nick was loading his cart with his simple, powerful staples: cans of sardines, tubs of Greek yogurt, a bag of dried beans. He overheard a familiar voice a few feet away. It was an old friend from his carpentry days, a man his own age, complaining to his wife. "I just don't have the energy anymore," his friend said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Everything is an effort. I guess this is just what it means to get old." The man looked tired, lost, the same way Nick had felt all those months ago. Nick finished putting his groceries in his cart. He then walked over to the shelf, picked up a flat, rectangular tin of sardines, and approached his friend. He held out the can, a warm, knowing smile on his face. "You have a minute, Tom?" he asked, his voice steady and kind. "Let me tell you a little story." He was no longer just the recipient of wisdom. He had become the wise elder, ready to pass on the simple, unspoken secret he had so powerfully reclaimed. Thank you so much for joining us on Arthur's journey in the strength of the tides. We hope his story has inspired you and shown that true strength and vitality are accessible to everyone, often through the simplest and most humble of means. If you enjoyed this story, please let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay strong and take care.